travel isn't just about destinations, it's about the people you meet, the cultures you immerse yourself in, the stories you carry home. I'm Relebogile Mabocha, and on my travel feature, I take you on a journey beyond the guidebook. Each week, I connect with fellow travelers, insiders, and storytellers to bring you the heart of every place. Whether it's a hidden gem right here in South Africa or a dream destination abroad. Join me as we travel through conversations, memories, and inspiration. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Bank, proud sponsor of the African Blockchain Report 2024. Good evening, welcome to the program. I'm Stephen Grootes. Well, plenty going on, of course, and just in the last hour or so, confirmation now that the Prudential Authority is going to now appeal the ruling that really went in the favor of Sipho Putyana. You may recall that he was going to be the chair of Absa Bank. He was the only person that was in line. And then there were sort of various claims against him. The judge eventually ruled in the case that what had happened was the Prudential Authority had sort of conducted an informal process. And the reason that that is a problem is that he did not get a chance to reply. He had no right of reply in the process. And for that reason, what the court judgment eventually said was the Prudential Authority was wrong to do it in that way. I'm not at all surprised that there was going to be an appeal here, because you kind of can see that the stakes are so incredibly high. Some of the people involved are very big names, people who've been around, people who have reputations to protect, and if I had their reputation, I'd want to protect them too. It does mean, though, and I mean, taking on Sipho Putyana, you're going to know you're in a fight one way or another, but it does mean it's going to go on forever and ever and ever. And that, I suspect, is going to be a major, major issue. It's the kind of thing that can hang around your neck, whether you're a bank, whether you're Sipho Putyana, or whether you're the Prudential Authority. So I think there might be some concerns around that. Talking of concerns, it seems the Finance Minister, Enoch Godongwana, a little worried about the idea of a sort of single holding company for state-owned entities. We'll talk about that a bit more in a moment. And then news from Chery, the car company, the car manufacturer, that they're actually looking at making models here. You can understand some of the reasons. I can think of reasons why they might choose not to, but we'll get into that in the next little while as well. I'm sure you've noticed this, that over the last kind of 15 years or so, maybe you, but a lot of people around you, if not you yourself, are probably feeling a little bit poorer. And Investec put out a big report looking at this. And we've known for quite a while, actually, that our economy has just not grown. I mean, how many times have you heard this conversation? What it means now, though, and I thought this was very interesting because it goes to our sense of self as a country, is that our average GDP per capita, in other words, how much money each person gets, so it's the total amount of GDP divided by the number of people in the country, that is now quite a lot lower than the global average. And I mean significantly lower. Now, we're often seen as a sort of upper income country. There are lots of different ways to look at these things. You can slice and dice the numbers any way you want. But it may just reflect a little bit on how we see ourselves with this news, that actually most people in South Africa are significantly poorer than the global average. And this gets straight to our conversations around inequality, of course, and how difficult some of those things are. Don't forget, Investment School tonight. And we thought that commodities being the hot issue, copper prices spiking, gold still incredibly high, platinum suddenly sort of bouncing. It's a good moment to be talking about that. And that's what we'll be doing this evening. We'll be talking about how you ride the commodity cycle. And one of the strange things about it is that there are a couple of ways to get involved in the commodity cycle. You can buy gold, or you can buy shares in a gold miner. That's just one way of looking at it. The other way that you can look at it is that you can also decide there's no yield in this. You're not going to get dividends, and therefore you're just not going to invest there at all. So there's a lot to look at when it comes to that. It's a very interesting conversation, actually. Looking forward to that. We'll have David Shapiro and Vincent Anthony Raja. So really top-tier people on The Money Show this evening from 7:30. Good to hear from you. 011 883 0702 021 446 0567 and 072 702 1702. I do wonder if it matters to you where in the world your car is made. That conversation's next.
702.
702.
Stephen is on The Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
One of the great sort of games, or one of the great kind of conversations over the last couple of months has been how many Chinese-made or how many Chinese brand cars you see on our roads. There's confirmation now that Chery South Africa is in the second phase of a feasibility study that could see them making some of their cars here. The car industry, of course, globally, going through a series of transitions, moving away from fossil fuels to hybrid and electric cars, but also away from European and American vehicles to Chinese cars. George Mini is the CEO at Auto Trader SA. George, good evening. Good to talk to you again. We have a very well-established car industry. We have particular government programs that incentivize this. Would it make sense for Chery to make some of their cars here?
Hi, Stephen, and great to be with you again and your 702 listeners. Yes, it would make very much sense for Chery to produce cars here, and the numbers speak for themselves because, firstly, they would be able to sidestep the 18% import tariff on importing cars into South Africa if they make them here, or even if they make a few of their variants in South Africa, they could offset import manufacturing credits against imports so that they pay less import tariffs into South Africa. So, the drive is really probably to lower costs, and they've reached critical mass.
I mean, that really is the issue. In the end, they're going to look at the numbers, and suddenly government policy becomes very important in this.
Exactly right. And the numbers are very, very good for them.
One of the big issues that has been our government policy towards electric and hybrid cars. So we took a little while for there to be an actual policy on electric cars. If I recall, there are some actually big incentives on the table. If you're going to come and build a plant to build electric cars, government can probably make that worth your while.
Yes. So the incentives, however, fall flat when it comes to the consumer. So from a manufacturing point of view, there are incentives in place, but from a consumer point of view, there aren't any incentives in place just yet. So yes, you're absolutely right. I think the biggest drawback from electric car point of view, particularly, is the 25% import tariff versus 18% on internal combustion engine vehicles. And right now, we can see that Chery is bringing in internal combustion engine vehicles. Just on Auto Trader sites alone, we've seen a 42% increase in people looking at Chery's June last year versus June this year.
That's a huge increase. I mean, what's their unique selling point here? And I'm presuming price is the major factor.
Well, it's a little bit further than price, Stephen. So it is price, but I think that Chinese vehicles are probably 80% the build quality. And I'm no manufacturer, but I've driven a lot of cars, and my team have driven a lot of cars. And probably 80% of the build quality of a European or German vehicle at 60% of the price, and that delta of 20% is what adds value to the consumer.
There's a series of transitions that we're seeing at the moment. Volkswagen says they can't make cars economically in Europe. China has a huge oversupply, a huge overcapacity of electric cars. Can we, as South Africa, relatively small, open economy, et cetera, can we compete given all of these transitions that are happening? And in a way, it's probably China that we actually have to compete with.
Yes, and I think it is China that we're going to have to compete with in the foreseeable future because they just have the volumes and they have the market to be able to do these things at scale. Especially if they bring manufacturing plants to South Africa, they'd be able to increase that scale.
I would imagine also the fact that we have people who've been building cars for many years. Some of them don't have jobs at the moment, but there are plenty of people with lots of experience in this sector, and that could be really quite useful.
It could be very useful. I mean, many people look negatively on Chinese vehicles in the market, but, let's be honest, their vehicles have gained momentum and they've gained popularity. But besides popularity and momentum, they've also increased the quality of the cars. Yes, maybe not to German and European standards in terms of build quality, but the technology you get in the cars, the extras you get in the cars, they are good cars at the end of the day, and they do meet the safety standards that are required to be in South Africa.
George Mini, thanks very much indeed. CEO at Auto Trader SA.
The Money Show on 702.
Monday to Friday, 6 to 8 p.m.
It now appears the National Treasury and the Finance Minister have some serious concerns about plans to create one single holding company that would then house all of the state-owned entities, all of the government companies that are in trouble all the time would be in one place. Parliament's looking at the National State Enterprises Bill, but it seems Godongwana is concerned this model could increase the scope for political interference. Do I need to spell out to you what that could mean? Khaya Sithole is an independent political analyst. Khaya, good evening. Is the minister right to be worried?
Good evening. Yes, he is. And the reason the minister has to be worried is that when you look at the history, it was supposed to correct the sins of the past where different strategically important enterprises had indeed been captured political process, in the sense that it was the politicians who determined who needed to go there. It was the politicians formulating a new model was to be able to break away from that political alliance, which really meant that any minister could decide what the fate of a particular entity would do. The problem with the new proposal is that it simply... The president obviously is probably going to delegate some of those powers to decide who should go where, so it doesn't really solve the ultimate issue of how do you break the link between the political principles.
All right, Khaya Sithole, I'm sorry, we do seem to be losing you on that. Unfortunately, it is an important story and it is something that we want to talk about. So sorry about that. Does seem to be a little bit of a problem with that line. We had been battling with him earlier, in fact, to get him on that line. And just to continue with that conversation, we'll try and get a better line for you because there is so much to talk about when it comes to these issues. So yeah, we'll speak to Khaya Sithole as we move through the program this evening.
The Money Show
With Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
and DSTV channel 856.
Well, there's been a fascinating series of developments in the United States. We've seen Nvidia go past $4 trillion in valuation yesterday. At the same time, a report on Bloomberg today that Meta hired a person called Ruming Pang from Apple at a price of $200 million. Essentially, they decided this one person was worth $200 million to their company. Apple, according to the Bloomberg report, decided not to counter. They didn't try and say to Pang, stay with us and we'll pay you more, because they felt the only other person who gets anything close to that is their CEO, Tim Cook. And this is all about artificial intelligence. It just shows you how much money is being thrown in that direction. The thing this person can do is all about artificial intelligence, and NVIDIA, of course, is all about that as well. And it does just show you, despite everything that's happening in the US, despite all of the concerns around tariffs, despite all of that, the money is going into one thing at the moment. And it's going into that one thing because people are making a big, big bet on the future. But it also suggests something else to me. It suggests, and this is obvious, that the competitive edge, in other words, if you're better by just 0.5%, the amount of money you will make will be absolutely huge. And that presumably is what's really going into these massive pay packets for AI programmers. It really is an astonishing thing. Just one other point to make about these investors. They better be right.
The Money Show.
The Markets.
Viv Goventer's portfolio manager at Rand Swiss. Viv, good evening. A lot going on around NVIDIA. $4 trillion yesterday. I was looking at the example of one person being offered $200 million. That's million and dollars and hundred in the same sentence, just to go and work for Meta. It is astonishing how much money is still flowing in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's even more than that, actually, because I think the deal that Meta is offering people is something like $100 million to sign up, $100 million salary, the $300 million potential bonus pool per year. So effectively, in a year, a person could make as much as $500 million. So these are the plays that we're talking about that are unbelievable. But like you said, it has to pay off. Remember, Meta did something similar with the metaverse, in which they were burning tens of billions of dollars, which even hundreds of millions, $100 million is only 1% of $10 billion. And they were burning multiple tens of billions of dollars. And then Mark Zuckerberg decided eventually, no, it wasn't worth it, and he kind of shelved that project. You haven't heard about the metaverse for a while. this is the kind of power you have if you are the guy with the super voting rights at a multi-trillion-dollar company. But in this case, I think he's not the only one going for it, unlike with the metaverse, where he was pretty much man alone trying to get VR off the ground like that. Here we have, Grok. 4 just came out from Elon Musk. We have, of course, what's happening with, Apple, with Microsoft and OpenAI, etc. Actually, Apple, strangely enough, is probably the one company that is the least, bullish on AI, it would seem, at the moment.
It's fascinating to watch it all play out, but there's just huge amounts of money that are going in there. Copper prices up, some of them up very strongly. The 50% tariff that the US President Donald Trump has been talking about did help some mining companies that have listings here, but that really still is the thing driving some parts of the markets at the moment.
Yeah, look, the thing with copper is that if AI does turn out to be a reality, firstly, you would probably need a lot more copper. And I think people don't realize just how advanced some of the stuff is. For instance, Waymo, the self-driving taxi company, which is owned by Google, has done about 10 million rides, over 10 million rides, in fact, paid for rides in the U.S. And that means basically at the moment it's pretty much a solved problem. You could get a city like Joburg or Durban or Cape Town and replace, taxis with, talking about the taxi cabs with these self-driving vehicles. And if that's the case, the disruption to the globe will be insane. And the two things to note here is that these cars work best with electric, so therefore copper demand for electric vehicles is quite significant, significantly more than for a fossil fuel-driven vehicle. And the second thing is if you need electric vehicles, you need to have the grid to basically get the electricity to the vehicle, which is also more demand for copper. So no matter which way you slice it, the demand for copper is likely to soar dramatically over the next few years if AI does take off in the way people think it will.
Still doesn't explain why Trump suddenly, almost out of nowhere, said that he was going to do this. It's a very strange thing. That's not the only sort of tariff news at the moment. Brazil's getting a tariff of 50%. Trump's explicitly tied that to the fate of the former President Jair Bolsonaro, who faces criminal charges for trying to foment a coup. That's the claim against him. And we now have a situation where the person in the White House is not just implementing tariffs, but is tying it to political objectives explicitly with regard to Brazil, but not with regard to us. This becomes an impossible situation for other countries to manage.
Yeah, look, the one thing that might save us is the taco trade, which is Trump always chickens out. And I think if he does put in place, for instance, this massive tariff on copper, eventually industry will come to him and say, this is ridiculous. We can't basically hope to have a grid that's operational with the electrical demands that you could have in the future with these kind of huge tariffs in place. And in the past, he's done that. He's just stepped back, for instance, with the farm workers, with farmers unions, etc. came to him and said, this is impossible. So he did have a step back on that. So I think he's probably going to have to adjust his demand or his idea around copper tariffs. Because, people don't realize this, but China, for instance, is adding the entire U.S. capacity every few years to their grid. And it's taken a huge leap in terms of energy production. And the U.S. is not just basically, stable in terms of what's happening. It's falling significantly behind what the Chinese are doing at the moment. So, yeah, I think he's going to have to change that. With regards to this intervention with Jair Bolsonaro, the Trump administration has taken a rather strong view on a couple of things. They've taken a view on, for instance, the AfD in Germany, which is the right-wing party in Germany. They've taken a stance on, for instance, the elections in Romania, etc. And I think this is just another step of that. The only positive thing here, again, is that they haven't been willing to back that up with any kind of real force, either in Germany or in places like Romania. Maybe Brazil might be different because it's not part of the EU and not part of a bigger group that might protect them. But generally, I think the taco trade, like I said, Trump always chickens out, might come into play here again.
And then earnings season beginning, I suppose, sort of really next week, maybe even tomorrow. It's going to be very interesting to see how South African companies are doing at the moment.
Yeah, look, when it comes to earnings season, the number one thing any company cares about is its own earnings. So you can look at the macro, you can look at the trends and whatever, but it comes down to it, the company itself has to make the money. And we are going to be seeing just what the impact is going to be, on the latest round of tariffs and uncertainty that we've seen around for some of these companies out there. Also, we're going to be seeing what kind of numbers these, tech companies be pulling around. Because remember, the tech, run has been significantly stronger than the overall market. And it's one of the reasons the U.S. has outperformed in the last couple of years. So we need to be seeing some of these tech companies produce the kind of profits that justify these higher prices. So yeah, it's going to be a very interesting next couple of weeks out of the US and other parts of the world as well.
Viv Govender, thanks very much indeed. Portfolio manager at Rand Swiss. Really do appreciate the time. Coming up in the next little while, we'll speak to the CEO at Investec Bank, Cumesh Moodliar, about why it is that you are right when you think you're feeling poorer than you were 15 years ago. That's to come with The Money Show. It's just gone 6:30.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Bank, proud sponsor of the African Blockchain Report 2024.
Well, good to hear from you this evening on 011 8830702 and 02144600567. It seems the business sector is the only part of the country that is not commenting at this stage. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we get there, about the unbelievable revelations that came from the KwaZulu-Natal Provincial Police Commissioner Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi over the weekend, the claims he made against the Police Minister, Senzo Mchunu. I'm sure you've been following it. It's incredibly important. And what's really required is going to be some kind of, I think, quite assertive action. I was struck today by the president announcing on Thursday, that's today, that he will make a statement to the nation on Sunday. And I was struck for several reasons. One is, any decision you make between now and then is so likely to be leaked. But also, if you've got different people in different parts of our criminal justice system who clearly are, it seems, almost at each other's throats, I don't know if you wait for 4 days and say that in 4 days' time you will act, because someone somewhere is going to think they're about to lose their job. And the risk of that is that this forces them or tempts them into some kind of extreme action. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying based on this person or that person, this is what they're going to do. I'm just saying I don't know if it's such a wise idea. I realize that the presidency's probably done this to take some of the heat off. Everybody's saying the president must act. For the good of the economy, the president must act, let's be clear. But to sort of say, I'm acting, but only on Sunday, I think might actually create more trouble for you. I don't think it's necessarily such a good idea. It's a very, very important story. EWN, as you know, is on it.
The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes.
You'll have heard plenty of conversations over the last little while about our lack of economic growth. More evidence now, actually, that our lack of growth since around 2010 means our population is now poorer, quite a lot poorer, than the global average. A new study by Investec Wealth and Investment International suggesting our GDP per capita is now just over $15,000. That's compared with a global average of just under $23,000. Cumesh Moodliar is the CEO of Investec Bank. Cumesh, good evening. I do appreciate the time. It's a really important topic. Our economy has clearly fallen behind, and that seems to have made us all poorer, and actually quite a lot poorer than the global average. I mean, this gets to the heart of how we see ourselves as South Africa.
Thanks, Stephen, and thanks for the chat. I think absolutely. I think from a South African perspective, what you've realized is that after 15 years of sluggish growth, you're really sitting at a situation where, compared to your global counterparts, you've had a 40% decline in GDP per capita relative to global averages. So that's coming out of a period really from, if you look at it between 1990 and 2010, nominal GDP per capita in South Africa moved in line with the average nominal GDP per capita globally. And then from 2010, you saw a stark dislocation between the two. And really, ultimately, as I've said, you look back at 2023 and it's 40% lower than the global average. So that is when you've had an economy growing at an average of about 1.3% GDP growth per year in the last 15 years. So that really does set the path ahead and the urgency that we've got to get GDP growth up to create an inclusive economic story for South Africa.
It can feel sometimes that we're locked in this path. 15 years basically of going backwards is a long time. People still seem to be stuck in old habits, old views, if I can use that phrase, of looking at the economy. And the longer we're trapped like this, perhaps the harder it is to break out of it.
I agree with you, but that it is harder to break out of it. But I do take some level of comfort from a few key factors, Stephen. The one thing is, firstly, we're in a lower inflation rate environment, and we've certainly seen the benefits of that. So with inflation being well contained within the midpoint of the central bank's monetary policy target is the one point I'd make. The second is we've seen a level of interest rate cuts over the last 8 to 9 months. And the MPC meets again at the end of this month, and obviously the jury's out as to what that decision would be. What does potentially cast some shadow over it, which I think came up in your show a bit earlier, is the fact that obviously we're sitting with trade tariffs now being imposed by the US and what the impact of that would be. So it could be that you sit with a more cautious approach from a monetary policy perspective, but certainly we're generally operating in an interest rate, a more interest rate benign, potentially cutting environment at the moment. And then also you've seen the rand being relatively steady and perhaps more on the back of dollar weakness, but a rand at under 18 rand, generally better than one would have expected. So with that said, there are a few key factors. And also, I think when we look at some of the structural reforms in South Africa, and as much as we know there's a long road ahead, we are seeing some positive momentum in areas like energy. We've certainly seen, to a large extent, the back of the Eskom crisis, as much as there's still a lot of work to be done, and I don't think we're completely out of the woods, but if we spoke 2 years ago, that would have been a very different discussion. And some work in logistics around rail ports, which seems to be moving in the right direction. But when looking at the pace of it and having regard for the lack of GDP growth and the sluggishness, you realize the one thing that comes to mind, Stephen, is there's just one phrase: speed of execution.
Keeps coming back to that. You also make the point that gross fixed capital formation is not happening quickly enough. Basically, we haven't been building enough infrastructure, and I will see that on my drive home. Is that really, do we point to that and say that's a failure of government?
I think I would link it to a couple of things. One, I do think, and you talk about your drive home. I think one of the key concerns we certainly have is local government in South Africa and failing municipalities. And I think as you talk about just living in Johannesburg in the last week, many people, including myself, you had a situation where you didn't have running water at home. Now, some of it's off the back of actual reinvestment in infrastructure, but some of it's off the back of very poor and creaking infrastructure that's not being replaced. You've seen, the impact on traffic lights. You've seen a lot of deterioration in basic, what I would call the 101 of city infrastructure. I think that needs a lot more urgent attention. I do take a level of comfort from the fact that the presidency has, through Operation Vulindlela, now set up a new working group to focus on local government. And again, we need to get that happening. I am concerned that the disconnect that continues to grow in basic services, often when there is an electricity issue at the moment, it's not as a result of potential Eskom failure, but a lack of what's happening from a distribution perspective of electricity at local government level. So, little substations that are not, or not little, substations that are not working, infrastructure that's failing. So local government is a very key priority in that you get the right approach. Coming back to some of your debate, a key issue is investment confidence and business confidence. And I think that generally, as much as generally fixed capital formation, a significant amount comes from the private sector, it is led often by government infrastructure spend. And we've got to start seeing these larger projects come to light and come into effect. And I think, in the current budget, the finance minister has allocated R1 trillion for infrastructure over the next 3 years. The sooner we can get those projects moving in the right direction, I believe that will boost business confidence, which then boosts fixed capital investment and fixed capital formation.
Back to the political promise that we'll turn the nation into a construction site. I hope that it happens this time. We had a new round of tariffs announced by President Trump earlier in the week, 30% for us. There's so much to it. Personally, I'm not convinced it'll be 30% in the end, but the uncertainty makes it harder for the world to grow. And when we're trying to get out of this sort of no-growth trap, I imagine it makes our life quite a lot harder too.
It really does. And I think, Stephen, a couple of things. One is that the debate, and I think the US have indicated they're open for further engagement, and I think they've set a window now And we understand this is a hard deadline and not like some of the softer deadlines we've seen to date in this tariff debate. The hard deadline, I understand, is the 1st of August. So effectively, we're at the 10th of July. We've got 3 weeks from a South African perspective to hopefully engage the US trade counterparties and reach some sort of trade agreement which is more beneficial. At 30%, it is punitive. And there are a number of key sectors that are impacted, particularly around motor industry and agriculture. So I think there are key sectors that are impacted, and there will certainly be secondary impacts to that. The second aspect would be that we're able to negotiate a trade deal which also creates the opportunity for South Africa, for example, to consider. I know one of the key issues is US gas as a potential supplier to South Africa. So potentially, could there be still a lot more done in the space? I think there could be, but the next 3 weeks are going to be the most imperative, and one would hope that we're putting our best approach and best team forward to be able to negotiate that for us.
Kumesh, thank you so much. Really do appreciate the time. As I say, such an important topic. Cumesh Moodliar is the CEO at Investec Bank.
The Money Show on 702.
Monday to Friday, 6 to 8 p.m.
Well, so much of the time on The Money Show, you'll hear conversations that at their root are really trying to sort of boost your return. They're trying to make sure that you get as much money as you can, make it as sustainably as possible. But money can also be used in other ways. It can be invested in a way to have other impacts. And what I'm talking about is often called impact investing. Gladwin Liu is the CEO at E Squared. It's an impact investor. Gladwin, good evening. You've actually been in this game a little while. How would you define impact investing? Obviously different from normal investing. How?
Good evening, Stephen. Thank you for having me on your show. Thank you for having me on your show, and good evening to you, your listeners. How would I define impact investing? The best way to describe it is we want to do good while doing well. We want to invest in the early stages of where businesses are formed and essentially harnessed in order to build those big businesses that will eventually become the engines that drive our economy.
When you look at your returns, do you assess them in the sort of normal way, or do you include other criteria? It's not just about a return, but you now have to have a lot of other criteria you need to include.
We look at the returns. We are an investment business at our core, but we do look at other returns. So we look at transformation in the form of more equitable distribution, investing in black and female founders. We look at job creation. We look at industries that we're impacting. So, for instance, from our portfolio perspective, we're more invested on the edtech, health tech, and infrastructure side of things.
I presume then that you get to know those sectors really quite well. You kind of know what's cooking there, and you become a specialist in it.
So the thing about E Squared is we're industry agnostic, primarily because when E Squared was set up by Mr. Gray, Alan Gray, the man, in 2007, he set it up to invest in primarily beneficiaries of the Alan Gray Orbis Foundation, and also to benefit non-profit companies that have public benefit organization status. And so therefore we wouldn't be able to determine what businesses these Alan Gray fellows would go into. However, we've since diversified. So we are industry agnostic and sector agnostic, so we see a lot of different industries, and we now are trying to use that data to further inform how we construct our portfolio.
Does your investment approach have a little bit more risk? There's a lot more to take into account. It's not just about money. You also perhaps need to be a little bit more, what's the right English word, Gladwin? Adventurous with what you decide to invest in. Does that automatically mean it comes with a little bit more risk?
It does. It does come with a lot more risk, and we are very we've benefited from the way Alan Gray set up the business. So in 2007, he sold a minority equity stake in Alan Gray, the asset manager, to E Squared. It was funded by a South African financial services institution into a trust. What then happens is E Squared benefits from, as long as Alan Gray continues to do well, we benefit from dividends, and therefore our funds under management keeps growing. Why that's important is we can take a lot more risk because we don't have shareholders or limited partners sitting waiting for a financial return. And so we can essentially try to take a lot more risk because we've grown the assets under our care, and we're able to, how can I say, accept a lot more risk because we're not dealing with pension fund money or other people's money.
So does that mean then, does that have a material impact on your return over time? If you have just 1% more risk over 10 years across your entire portfolio, that would have an impact.
It would have an impact. We've I guess in the venture capital space, and like you said in the question before this, sometimes been known as adventure capital. And so what you start to see in this space is we take a lot more risk. We invest at the pre-seed, very early stage of the business life cycle when the businesses are at the concept, proof of concept, in that validation phase. But then we also are investing at the small cap private equity. So on the balance of things, we've had a really good return. So we've got a 42% fair market value growth in our assets under management. But like my ex-chairperson used to say, fair market value is like beauty. It's in the eye of the beholder. And so, but we've also been able to get real returns. So we've been able, from the 500 odd million that we've put into commercial investments, we've returned about 100 million.
All of this, you must see sectors change if you're putting money into certain places. I know you say you're industry agnostic, but you'll be able to also monitor companies going from very little to something much bigger, to beginning to stand on their own 2 feet without you.
Yes, we have. We've been able to see that in the green space, infrastructure. We've been able to see that like in the edtech space as well, because we've seen students start 3D printing companies. We've got a bakery. So we've seen a lot. But what we have seen change quite significantly is where the returns are coming from. And we've seen that, for instance, the infrastructure space, and I know you were talking to your previous the previous interview, we're talking about it. We've seen the infrastructure space, specifically independent power producers, the assets there grow quite significantly. And then we have a water technology business that's also done really, really well.
Gladwin, most people, I think, look at their returns and their reward comes from that. So it comes from probably two things. One, getting the money, and two, sort of knowing that you actually made the correct choice. I wonder if your sense of reward maybe comes from somewhere else.
I would like to say it's seeing all these businesses flourish. So we do see a lot of businesses fail because we are investing at this very early stage. But we've seen businesses grow. One of the examples I can talk to you about is Kula. One of the businesses that's in our portfolio. We've just helped. We led the Series A round this year, and that was quite significant for us. And that reward in seeing that business go from being a small digital platform to winning awards and to raising their Series A. And the business that's in the agriculture space is so rewarding. I think I annoy my wife because we'll be driving and I'll be like, you see that business we've invested in there? And so that's, I think, where a lot of, personally for me at least, where my reward comes from.
Gladwin Liu, thanks very much indeed. CEO at E Squared, do appreciate it. Lots of different ways to invest, of course, lots of different ways to have an impact. And as I say, one of the sort of whole points of the Money Show is to basically try and help you have a rewarding kind of reward to have the best possible investment outcomes. But in impact investing goes through phases, of course. There's a lot of activity around it from time to time. There's certain things everybody wants to invest in. I do wonder a little bit about how adventurous you actually have to be and how difficult that can be. But yeah, fascinating world, and a slightly different one to the normal investment conversations that you hear here on The Money Show.
702. Stephen is on X.
At Stephen Grootes.
Well, in a moment, I don't know if you've seen these. I've managed to stay away from them as far as I know, but reaction videos. These are people who make a ton of money on TikTok and YouTube, not by actually adding a huge amount of content. You see their reaction to another video that's playing, and there's actually been quite a series of court cases about it. Some of them really interesting. Siphumelele Zondi's been looking at that, and we'll focus on that over the next little while. But it gets to the heart of whether you can what you can monetize and how you can monetize. It's actually quite complex because it leads to questions about whether you're just really re-showing a video, or if you're re-showing a video while you react to it. Is that now new content? Well, I'm not really sure. maybe not. And I think court cases have gone in different directions on this, but it does just show you how the social media environment is changing. Out of YouTube, always something new. It's just gone 7 o'clock.
And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Bank, proud sponsor of the African Blockchain Report 2024. Plenty coming up in the next little while. Don't forget Investment School tonight. There is so much going on around commodities. We've got very high gold price. Platinum prices suddenly seem to be booming again, so unexpectedly as well, by and large. And then at the same time, of course, we've got copper prices spiking this week. We'll focus on all of that. But how do you ride the commodity cycle? Do you invest deeply? What kind of role should commodities play in your investment portfolio? That'll be part of the conversation that we're looking at in Investment School. We'll talk about social media, YouTube and TikTok monetization and reaction videos in just a moment. And then also the impact of all of the tariffs on smaller businesses in Small Business Focus tonight. You might think, in some ways it seems to be a group of people in a very far place talking about something that may or may not happen. But unfortunately, for various reasons, it does look like the tariffs will happen. And even if they don't, the sheer uncertainty of it all is what's creating so many problems for so many companies and so many business people around the world tonight. Good to hear from you as well, of course, on 011 883 0702 021 4460 567 and voice notes this evening on 072 702 1702.
The Money Show, Tech Thursday.
Well, in social media, many people have started to make careers and actually done quite well simply out of posting online content. For the moment, the person who is most followed on TikTok is Kaby Lame from Senegal. They make reaction videos. In other words, they're not really original. It would be a reaction of them listening to me, for example. So lots of arguments about whether this is the creation of new content. Here's facial reactions to people's videos. YouTube says they're now changing the type of content that can actually be monetized on their platform. Siphumelele Zondi, of course, your tech expert. Siphumelele, good evening. So YouTube have been running monetization for quite a long time now. Why are they deciding to change who can monetize on their platform?
Yeah, YouTube says they're changing their monetization policy simply because there's a lot of AI content that's starting to appear on the platform. And I suppose they're changing what original content is. And also the worry is that a lot of people, earlier you mentioned Kaby Lame, for example, whose content on other platforms is basically reaction videos where people are posting other people's videos and then he would be reacting to other people's videos. A lot of such content is starting to appear online because I guess it worked with one person, so it's working with other people. So they're saying that they want to focus more on original content as opposed to content that's not created by the individual themselves sometimes, and also content that is created by AI as well. And they think there's a lot of, because of AI, there's a lot of sort of like spammy content that's starting to appear where you find people just getting this content that is sort of like bombarding their accounts when they don't want it. And we do know that with AI as well, we are getting a lot of fraud as well with the content that's starting to appear.
Okay, so to try and work out which content is which can be actually quite difficult. And some people who have been producing content for a long time might suddenly find themselves on the wrong side of this.
Totally, and it will be. So we can't know what their exact method is going to be, right? Because they're starting on the 15th. Of July. So, yes, and you might find that people who've actually probably have benefited from YouTube's monetization policies might get into trouble and might end up, might find themselves not being paid the way they would normally get paid by the platform because they would have changed what original content is or what they, the type of content that they want to pay.
We've seen these sort of facial recognition videos, and in some ways it's not really new content. It's someone watching a piece of entertainment or something that's already on YouTube and just reacting to it and not saying anything, literally just their face. I honestly don't get it, but maybe that's just a sign of something that I have to deal with. But I'm presuming that, these have become very popular, but the argument about what's original content, which is as old as art itself, suddenly becomes right to the front.
Well, that's the thing, right? Because sometimes you might find that it's your own video. Is that also not going to be paid for? Because what you might find is that you've taken an old video because you want to say something about the old video, or you want to do a compilation of, let's say, I don't know, you went to 10 different locations in the last year. You did individual videos about those 10 different locations in the last year. You now want to do a compilation video. So when their algorithm picks up that, hold on, it seems like we've seen this before, we've seen that before, but it's still your video. It's still an original video, right? Because you've sort of turned that content to something else, and you've created something new from it, from something that you would have filmed yourself. So this is where it gets tricky on what they will be finding to be original content. But what you're also finding, especially with news sites online or news platforms, you'll find that someone might take content from a particular news platform, upload it on their own page because it's a topical issue. They might make money from that as well, but they didn't generate it, did they? They found it online. They found it on a different platform, and because it's topical, it's what people are searching for. They make money from it. So it does actually get tricky on what they will be choosing to be calling original content, and whether if it's your own video, if it's a compilation, as some people do compilations of things that they filmed themselves, but of videos they've taken in the past, if that's going to be recognized as it was in the past, or if it's going to say everything must be fresh and new and never appeared online before.
What is original? Radio, obviously. Is this a change we're going to see on other platforms? Are we going to see TikTok maybe going in a different direction? They might actually get more content and make more money that way.
Well, that could be it, right? They might get more content, but they also, in some regions, especially like in South Africa, haven't been clear on how their payouts work. And people would believe that they don't have payouts, but sometimes you would speak to a content creator who says, hold on, I've had a payout. But obviously they haven't gone public on how this actually works for them and how they choose and the type of contents that they recognize, if they recognize everything as original content, as long as it's reached a huge engagement. In regions where they're clear, they do say that it must be about 100,000 views on your particular page in the last 30 days or so. So if you, not from one piece of content, but on your page, this is in the regions where they have publicly said that they do have some sort of payout. But maybe content creators can also look for different methods for them to make money. Sometimes the method is outside the platform itself, right? Sometimes the method is on other platforms because your page is popular. You then go outside the platform to look for money, which is what a lot of South African content creators have been doing anyway.
Siphumelele Zondi, thanks so much. Really interesting conversation. A lot happening around social media and YouTube at the moment.
The Money Show, Small Business Focus.
Small Business Focus is brought to you by Capitec. No matter the size of your business, Capitec's got you. So obviously the last few days dominated by the news from the White House, the US President Donald Trump imposing tariffs of 30% on us, also instituting tariffs of 50% against Brazil, and of course this 50% tariff on copper imports. There's a lot going on. You've heard many conversations around it. Songqobo Vuba is an entrepreneur and business strategist. Songqobo, thanks so much for coming in. Good evening. So in a way, the trade wars are happening far away. It doesn't really matter. He's not going to do it anyway. I shouldn't be looking at it like that for my small business, should I?
I don't think you should, I think what's that saying, never waste a good crisis.
Yeah.
And I actually think that this is an interesting crisis that small businesses need to wake up and pay attention to. So either those small businesses who are exporting some of their goods or, goods overseas, and by overseas, really like not just the US, but also kind of small businesses who aren't currently exporting. It really forces you to take a look at the global environment and ask yourself, are you kind of operating in a really small island if you're just operating in South Africa? And as kind of certain products become less and less competitive from a pricing perspective, I mean, using a good example, I think after this week we all need good examples. So winemakers in South Africa, there are certain winemakers in South Africa who export all their goods, and a fair amount goes to the US. With certain tariffs currently going up and duties going up, what it means is that we may have a lot more supply sitting in South Africa. And therefore, if you're a local wine producer and kind of only sell to South Africa, you suddenly have a lot more competition because some of the larger players are now back with additional product that they're looking to sell in South Africa. So I really think it's one you need to look at.
It goes in lots of directions, right? There are consequences in every direction. So at first glance, it may look like this sector is going to do very badly, and suddenly it changes. So it reminds me a little bit of COVID. You couldn't get in your car, but if you could drive a motorbike and had one, you were suddenly in a position where you could make money.
Exactly. Whereas before COVID, we weren't really respecting you much on a motorbike, right? So 100%. I think part of this whole tariff wars really forces us to understand input costs. It forces us to understand the full unit economics of some of the products that we produce as businesses. But it also forces us to think about kind of, like you say, the sectors we're in. So, I mean, if you look at kind of how the markets are responding every time these tariffs are announced, there's certain kind of sectors that struggle, and then there's some that bounce up. So, I mean, if you look at copper as an example, if you look at what the resources, on the stock exchange have been doing, that kind of tells you what the market thinks is going to happen in those sectors. And I think as small businesses who operate in the value chain of some of these large companies, we need to be paying attention, because you may think, listen, I'm just running a marketing company and I service a couple of customers. But the reality is, if you're servicing a company that does export to the US and suddenly isn't, or suddenly their goods are no longer competitively priced in the US, it actually means you're probably going to be hit because they're going to be looking to cut down on spending. And you need to start thinking about where do you replace that revenue from.
It would seem to me that there's going to be a lot of competition for new markets, and you really kind of want to be first in. You want to be the first South African knocking on the door of a company in Beijing. You don't want to be the 53rd. You want to be the first.
100%. And I think, unfortunately, the ship is sailing, right?
Yeah.
So actually, one's already late to the party. It's interesting that you should mention Beijing. If you think about the president who's on his way back to take us into his conference on Sunday, right? Coming back from BRICS. And effectively, there's a number of moves that are being made from a BRICS perspective in order to enable trade between small businesses in South Africa and other BRICS nations. If you think about the AGOA framework between us and America, which basically now as a trade agreement is really on the rocks and unlikely to continue, there's certain products that, in the SADC region even are now suddenly needed, or there's an oversupply of. I was leading up today and thinking about how, certain things we take for granted, but like tea can be traded tariff-free between Kenya and South Africa. If you're a tea producer, are you currently trading with Kenya? Or are we all trying to get into the US market? Another one that was interesting is flour, maize meal, poultry products. They can actually be traded tariff-free between Ghana and South Africa. It really forces us to look on the continent, and it really forces us to look at partners such as BRICS. And China is a massive market. I think for small businesses, what we need to do is we often look at it as so it's stimulating and daunting and overwhelming. We really need to get engaged. And I think one of the tips I would give to small businesses is that a number of financial services providers, banks and otherwise, actually have really brilliant trade solutions and support for helping small businesses to actually get their certificate to be importers or exporters, and actually help them along the way from a trade finance perspective, if finance is the issue, or from a quality assurance perspective, or even finding off-takers for your products to get into Beijing, where probably 16,000 of our companies would be needed to produce enough for what the buyers in China are needing for their enormous market. So I really think this is a crisis not to be wasted for small business.
Since the 1990s, we've really seen a trend towards increasing globalization. So transport costs were down. It's all about moving stuff. The internet, the fact that, on WhatsApp, you can just have a conversation with someone wherever they are, and it's the same cost, or virtually free, rarely, if you're outside of McDonald's Wi-Fi. And who hasn't done that? So now we're going backwards. And I mean, I find that frankly quite scary for lots of reasons. More trade usually means fewer wars. But you now have to, we're in a completely different era. And I'm not sure how small businesses should really navigate that.
I think it's so you're right. It does feel like we're going backwards. I think as I reflect on it, it's really that we're living in parallel universes.
Yeah.
Because we are in the age of globalization. I mean, look at your earlier interview about content and YouTube and social media, right? We are kind of literally a device away from someone in any part of the globe. However, at the same time, from a politics, trade perspective, from leaders' perspective, I think a number of countries are starting to protect their own territory. And if you think about even the US, that's what's happening. It's kind of all in the name of protecting the US and making America great again. And it does also force us to be a bit insulated in our view of like, oh, actually, what are the opportunities in South Africa? What are the opportunities in SADC, in Africa, while still being super connected? And I think the balance that we need to strike is how do we leverage the globalized toolbox in order to be super efficient and competitive in our home base, which is the African continent. If we can manage to straddle those two extremes and live in those two parallel universes, I think that's where the magic is for small businesses.
In the end, it's a bit like our country. We're all crying and screaming, and look at us. If our economy was stronger, and it hasn't grown, we were talking earlier, since 2010, then we wouldn't really be in this position. If you're running a small business, you need to crack the local market. It actually needs to be a well-run, efficient, organized, sustainable local business to sort of survive these difficult times.
100%. And I think it's maybe a blessing in a curse is if you can build a business in South Africa and make it tick and make it work, you could probably build a business anyway, right? So I really think that's the challenge. And like you say, we've got to get really sharp in how small businesses focus on opportunities, are super efficient, leverage the technologies and other global advances that are at our disposal while still solving for local problems, because I don't think you're going to find another place that has more problems ripe to be solved with some of the technology that's available to us as a toolbox. And that's really the ask.
Thank you so much for coming in. Somkoba Vuba is the entrepreneur and business strategist. Really do appreciate it. Small business focus tonight.
The Money Show.
Investment School.
Well, one of the big stories of the last sort of few months has been what's happening with commodities. Gold in particular has broken record after record. Then we've seen platinum suddenly, almost out of nowhere, suddenly start to do a lot better than it has been doing, mainly not for any particular market reason, but people suddenly realized there was a deficit of platinum. Copper, of course, the latest this week. There was a reason for that. And Trump's threat of a 50% import tariff on imports of copper into the United States. So what role should commodities play in your investment portfolio, if any? Vincent Anthony Rogers, the CEO and co-founder at Differential Capital, and David Shapiro's the stockbroker and chief global equity strategist at Sasfin. Gentlemen, I really do appreciate the time. Thanks so much for coming in. David, let me start with you. How do you even start with commodities when we see the cycles, and particularly recently, can swing so strongly one way or another?
Stephen, that's a problem with gold. The fact that we're talking about it now is probably too late. You know, we should have bought the gold when nobody wanted it, which can be a 10-year cycle. You know, that's gold. You can wait for 10 years before you finally get your kind of returns, and it's usually in times of stress. And we can talk about what's caused the gold price to go up, and also discuss whether you believe it's going to continue. So it's one of those assets. It's a fear asset. It's something people buy when they feel things are going to go wrong or going to collapse. But for years, people have bought them, particularly in the Europeans, and also South Africans have always had a little bit of gold in their portfolios. But commodities can be very, very tricky to deal. It's always best left to the professionals.
Vincent, why do commodities have such cycles? I mean, that's the way that markets work, but it says something maybe just about how the global economy works, that we have such cycles of commodities.
Well, if we split commodities up into like the main types, your mining commodities and your soft commodities, I think with mining commodities, they tend to be more cyclical simply because it takes a long time to build a mine. And often during that time, demand can either move in one direction or the other. And typically what happens is miners start their capex cycles too late. And as you can see now, which is probably going to be the case with the platinum industry, where we're probably years away from adding new supply, you could find that if demand just tilts in a certain direction marginally, it ends up squeezing the price dramatically. But I guess that's just how you stimulate new supply. When it comes to the soft commodities like, corn and maize and things like that, that's slightly different. They have much shorter cycles linked to weather, linked to avian flu and things like that. So they're different ranges for the two types.
David, I'm surprised after all of this time there are still surprises. So the sort of gold super cycle that we're seeing now, I think very few people saw coming. Maybe someone could have predicted what was happening in the States. Maybe if you had predicted Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But what's really driving it, though, is central bank buying of gold, and that's a harder thing to sort of see. But this is a kind of super cycle that no one saw coming, and is that a risk and a little bit of a blessing, maybe?
Well, no one saw it coming because no one expected Russia to invade Ukraine. And I think what probably triggered that is that America's reaction was to freeze Russia's assets. And I think other central banks said, hold on a sec, and there are a lot of rogue states around the world. There are a lot of people who fear that this could happen to them. And we started to see the shift out of the dollar, out of the clutches of the United States into other assets, gold, of course, being one of them. And that's continued. I also think there was a desire to break away from, the control of the United States, control of the dollar. And that cycle's continued, for 2 years plus. And gold has literally gone up. Stephen, there's something that I must mention as well. There's just two things very quickly. I won't go into it in too detail, but if you go to a bank and you want to be their top client, what card do they give you? They give you a platinum card. Okay.
Yes.
And platinum is now it's a third the price of gold. They should give you a gold card, but that tells you how gold has moved against platinum, because platinum traditionally has always been more expensive than gold. And I think there's a bit of a catch-up coming now. People have just understood, this gap or this deficit, and shifting from gold to platinum. I think the other thing, and just talking to what Vincent says, there's a big difference between dealing in the producers and dealing in the metal. For most of my life, I spent on the stock exchange. We dealt in gold mines, not gold commodity. And that's a whole different dynamic. The mining, the profitability of mines, the efficiency of mines at whatever price versus the actual underlying commodities as well. So there are two different markets there that, we can talk about.
Well, I was going to ask that because that's one of the big questions, isn't it, Vincent? Do you invest in the mine? I mean, Harmony is a great example of a mine that share price has just shot up through all of this. Or do you invest in gold? And obviously, even a mine in a boom time can make a mistake. On the other hand, you might get a better return over time.
Well, with gold producers and miners, that's been quite difficult over the last, I would say, 15 years. Simply because the rate or the costs of mining have risen far faster than even the gold price has until very recently. And so that's the key question, is whether the gold price here is sustainable. If it is, and it hangs around here and perhaps, goes a little bit higher, these gold stocks aren't on very expensive multiples. And some of them do have reserves that are quite long. So you can possibly see them being becoming more expensive. That's on the gold side. Perhaps it's also worth talking about, the platinum stocks, because that's something that's really interesting. Because to David's point, I think with gold, we know that the drivers are, central banks. There is some secular trend there. But in the case of platinum stocks, what is potentially interesting is that there is a fundamental driver, which is, perhaps electrical vehicle take-up is not going to be as quick as people thought, or might not even have the penetration that people expected. And the alternative, which is, hybrid cars, which actually consume far higher amounts of platinum, become sort of the neutral ground in which the world market settles on for, in the quest for lower emissions. And And we now have a situation where in South Africa and, I guess to Russia to some extent, where you've got large reserves, but no one has really spent the last 5 years trying to expand supply. So you could see companies that have large reserves be seen as call options on potentially a massive spike in platinum group metals. So that could be an interesting sector to watch.
One of the other things, and Vincent, you were talking about sort of softer commodities, so food, agricultural products. And David, I would like to think that if you're looking for something that's pretty stable over time, we're always going to need to eat, right? And you would think that might be a food production company, agricultural producer, whatever it is, might be something you need to keep a few shares in, just because no matter what happens, that demand's not going to go away.
No, if it flies or grows, just leave it alone. Grows in the ground. That's always said, leave chickens alone. If it flies like a chicken, leave it alone. Those kind of commodities, food commodity, honestly, that is such an incredibly difficult area, because there you're subject to changes in weather. And, globally people grow wheat. And you'll find that if one country goes through a bit of a tough time, the price goes up and so on. I find that it's really something that, when I say professionals, people who are really close to that kind of industry should get involved with. Farmers, for example, but not you and me or just the common or investor. Very, very difficult area. The other one, if you want to add to the area of difficulty, we can bring in oil as well. If you really want to get punished or punish yourself, try trade oil. So exceptionally difficult to read.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. I suppose, Vincent, the other question we would ask is it better to have a portfolio with no commodities in it at all? We've spoken in the past about investing in gold and why you would do that and why you wouldn't do that. There's no dividend for a start. But would it actually be better on balance to just leave them all alone, especially when you see the volatility that we've seen quite recently? And with Trump in the White House, that volatility is going to be there for a while.
I think if you can afford to stomach some volatility and you've got a longer-term investment horizon, I think it would be unwise not to have commodity exposure. And for me, I go back to those secular things. So if we can look at David's spoken very well about the central bank and gold, but if I could talk about a few other sort of off-piste commodities like copper. So in the case of copper, we're starting to see a material divergence. I'd say over the last 30 years, there's been a big link to building construction and copper demand. Copper piping and things like that. That relationship has actually broken down recently, and that's because of the rise of, let's call it, the middle class in many parts of the world, as well as developed countries in the world consuming far much more electricity due to AI, which is a secular trend. There is no element that conducts better than copper. You can use aluminium potentially as a substitute, but that's require 3 or 4 times the amount. So that both of those metals are things where over the long term, again, and they're offered in the form of ETFs. If you look at the rand copper price, it's actually quite a stable, not as volatile as gold and the others. And that trend over the long term actually substantially beats inflation. And you can get, ETFs to physical copper. I also think it's, quite a few of the producers as well are worth a look. So I think if you've got a longer term view, I think you should have a serious look at it. And to David's point, perhaps you look at specialists that can invest that for you in commodities.
We're speaking to Vincent Anthony Raja this evening, the CEO and co-founder of Differential Capital. David Shapiro, as you know, of course, the stockbroker, chief global equity strategist at Sasfin. We're talking about investing in commodities on Investment School tonight. Kind of the right time to do it when you consider everything that's happening around the world. You're with The Money Show.
The Money Show.
Investment School.
Vincent Anthony Raja, CEO and co-founder of Differential Capital. David Shapiro is veteran stockbroker and chief global equity strategist at Sasfin on Investment School tonight. Talking, of course, around commodities. David, when we talk about cycles and we talk about gold, for example, at some point, if you're going to raise any return, you need to know when to sell. And you're, as always, trying to sort of predict the future. Are we at a kind of moment where maybe you start to have that conversation with whoever? Is it now the point at gold that we need to sell? Is it now at the time where we need to sell some gold and buy some more platinum, for example?
Yep. The fact that we're talking about it now and that it's become such a hot subject, I think you'll normally find that that's the time that it starts to lose momentum. And I wouldn't be surprised if we've seen the peak in both of those. I like Vincent's view on copper, and I like the view that, the expansion of AI, of data centers and that is going to require a huge amount of electricity. I don't even think we can understand how much power is going to be needed, which is going to increase the need for for base metals, for industrial metals. So and the other thing is, I think we're going into a cycle where interest rates are going to start coming down in the United States quite dramatically, and that's going to take a lot of the glow off gold as well. I know that people will say, oh, well, it's going to increase the deficit in the United States, panic and so on. But my own view is, I think we've seen the top of gold. It might not fall in a heap, but I think it's going to struggle to kind of get a lot higher from the levels that we've seen. So this is kind of, for me, peak gold.
Vincent, are there other
not a common view?
No.
You're going to find the gold bulls phoning in and sending hate mail and so on.
Well, I'm sure they have your email already, David, from the last time. Yes, Vincent, are there other commodities that people are looking at the moment? I mean, everyone's talking about rare earths. Wherever you go, there's a Reuters story about rare earths and Trump.
Yeah, I also like the rare earths for similar reasons that I like copper for. So if you think about a mineral like neodymium, it's a weird thing. They call them rare earths, but they're actually quite common. But it's hard to find them in concentrations enough that you can mine them profitably. You take a metal or an element like neodymium, it's critical to make magnets for electric car vehicles. China produces probably 80% of the world's supply. So there are some interesting ETFs that you can get access to that have, that can give you exposure to those. And I think that again is a secular trend that one has to watch very carefully. Maybe just to add on to what David was saying, this electricity consumption trend. Besides copper, there's a nexus around that, which includes, surprise, surprise, coal. Because even in countries like China, where they're building a huge amount of solar, there's still a big amount of coal that they're still continuing to consume. And then the other one, which is a pet favorite of mine, is uranium, which I think nuclear is probably in the very long term, probably the most stable, low emission power source that we can use. And as it becomes safer, and now that the technology has evolved to, you can make these what they call small modular reactors. As that technology gets rolled out, I think the demand for uranium could increase quite substantially. And that's also not the most common mineral around. So there's, again, interesting listed companies, but as well as ETFs that can give you exposure to that.
David, when it comes to commodities like this, I suppose what you're looking for are things that are going to be needed in the future and yet will be quite scarce. I mean, that's the platinum story at the moment. Gold I'll put in a slightly different category, but that's certainly the platinum story, the rare earth story, the copper story, very much. So you've got to look for examples of where there will be demand in the future, and as they become more and more scarce, or let me put this another way, are in areas that are harder to mine, then actually that's the place to put your money, I would think, if you're going to get into this space.
In theory, yes. In practice, we find it doesn't really happen. And that's the difficulty with commodities, in that it is such a specialist world and run by people who are very, very close, to those markets. From a common point of view, I try and avoid them. It's leave it to the professionals. And I say this with the best of intentions. It is so difficult, to understand. And I have to tell Vincent a story. My dad, for my bar mitzvah, he took my money and he bought a uranium company. Remember, my dad was on the market as well, a big gold trader. And he bought me, with my bar mitzvah money, a uranium company called Dominion Reef. And every evening when I was on the front lawn playing and the star would come, I'd go look at the price of Dominion Reef. And one day I looked, it wasn't there. It had gone, finished. And that's uranium. It's ever since I've been on the market and that we've always been talking about uranium. And it's never really never really featured and reached the kind of levels that we thought. But I'm not taking away from the view that we're going to need it, and nuclear could be another fuel. But uranium as such is probably more difficult than anything else we've spoken about tonight.
Sure, how interesting. I'm still stuck on the star, but because I also grew up in that kind of house. So much has changed. Didn't look at the share price though. Vincent, we forget, of course, in our country how important commodities have been. Essentially formed it, in some ways. And that still then has an impact. So if we go through a time where platinum and gold are very strong, that must have an impact on all of our lives just because we're in South Africa.
Yeah, a simple example is when platinum, gold, coal, whatever it is, the prices rise substantially. Remember, these companies pay huge royalties to the government. So a simple thing is you won't see VAT increases when we see commodity prices rising, quickly. And, I grew up in a small town called Grootes, so I've lived commodity cycles, through boom and bust. And you can literally see the impact of rising platinum prices on the economy around you, people getting jobs, opening up small businesses, and then they start to shutter on the other side of it. So I suppose South Africa is interesting in that we're not that disconnected. I know platinum and gold are small contributors directly to GDP, but indirectly, it's quite substantial. And so that's an important thing to remember in the South African case. And I suppose that's where it's important to realize how you diversify. Sometimes you might find that investing in the banker that funds the platinum company is just a bad idea as, investing all of your money in one place. So it's an important thing to remember, and it's a key driver of our economy.
Vincent Anthony Raja, thank you so much. CEO and co-founder of Differential Capital. Thanks so much for coming in. David Shapiro, always a joy to talk to you. Really do appreciate the time. Thank you. The veteran stockbroker and chief global equity strategist at Sasfin.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Bank, proud sponsor of the African Blockchain Report 2024.
Well, of course, U.S. markets open and beginning to trade positive now, partly because Delta Airlines, they had such a bullish update. They're predicting quite strong earnings over the next quarter or so for various reasons. As a result, the Dow Jones is up 0.6%, the Nasdaq up 0.14%, and the S&P 500 up 0.35%. The story still, of course, around NVIDIA, the huge amounts of money that go into their valuation. The other story, that Bloomberg report we referenced earlier, around how one person is being offered a salary of $200 million just to leave Apple and go to Meta. It is astonishing what we're seeing happening in terms of global markets when it comes to artificial intelligence. We'll be back with you tomorrow. Good evening. It's 8 o'clock.